I decided to put out a lot more podcasts, which I have absolutely no experience in doing. I've written a whole bunch of books, so I'm used to that medium, and I've spoken publicly a million times all over the world, so I'm used to that. But podcasts is a whole different ballgame. I mean, when you speak in front of people, which I love doing, you're interacting with them, you're speaking with them, you're smiling, you're laughing. There's a whole different dynamic. This whole thing of podcasts is like different because you're speaking into a microphone, and if it's a solo monologue, so you always have the question, is it going to be ad-libbed? Are you going to write it down? Is it scripted? So, but we're going to just ad-lib this one and see how it goes. This series is a series about my experiences in the prison service. And the reason that I'm titling this episode as There's Always Tomorrow is because I think that's a pretty central theme to something I learned in my many years in the prison. I worked in a maximum security prison for 13 years. That's from 7:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock every evening, and that's a lot of time. That's about 5-6 days a week. 13 years. The majority of your time you're in prison because you've also got a couple of days a month. We've got to be officer in charge. I speak about that in a different episode. Anyway, you're spending a lot of time inside behind the bars, and I had 700 to 1,000 maximum security prisoners. And I had terrorists, and it was crazy. So, why am I titling this episode "There's Always a Tomorrow"? Well, the thing is like this: if you take a look in the professional literature, you'll see that there's one category, according to a lot of studies, there's one category of work which is actually higher than combat officers or combat soldiers in PTSD. If you actually there's actually studies on this stuff, the surveys. PTSD is a real thing. People come back from traumatic experiences overseas and wars, or police have a lot of it and medics have a lot of it, but it's generally considered that soldiers have the highest rate of PTSD. Well, if you read it, some of the surveys, they say that there's actually one profession which is actually higher than combat soldiers, and that is prison workers. It's an interesting thing to think about. And some of the reasons they say is because it's not befitting if you're a corrections officer to speak about your weaknesses or your fears. It doesn't fit the character that you're supposed to be fitting. There's a lot of reasons for it, but basically, but they're going through the same or more trauma than people in combat do. I mean, they're seeing extreme situations on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a moment basis. You're seeing people dying, you're seeing people killing each other, you're seeing drugs, you're seeing people damaging themselves, you're seeing people in solitary confinement. I mean, you're seeing and smelling, and I mean, prison is not only seeing, it's also smelling. It's a horrible stench in most prisons. Because you've got hundreds of men or hundreds of women in a closed place, and there's perspiring, and there's smoking, and there's cleaning detergents, and there's paint, and there's grease from the hinges. People are cooking there. And ventilation is not always that great. Prison is as much a smell as it is the sights that you see on a daily basis. That's just the reality of it. So, why am I calling this episode "There's Always a Tomorrow"? Well, the thing's like this, that I'm calling it "There's Always a Tomorrow" for a couple of reasons. Reason number one is That's just the reality. The reality is there is always a tomorrow. But I saw a lot of my prisoners and inmates go under a lot of stress. They've got sentencing, and then they've got the court case, and then they've got the sentencing, and they've got to actually sit in prison for many years. They've got the situation at home. They've got the situation in the prison. They've got to take care of their wife and their kids at home. There's really nothing more stressful to anybody than to be a criminal. I mean, it's a lousy life, in my opinion. But the reality is that prisoners, all the vast majority of prisoners eventually do get released. They do go back into society. And my advice to anyone who ever becomes an inmate is to always be thinking about the future. Obviously, I'm against crime. I think the most important thing for them is to try to figure out why they're in prison, what their life is all about, and if that's what they really want to continue doing. But for inmates, definitely this episode can be called "There's Always a Tomorrow." Again, do you want your tomorrow to be better than today, or do you want it to be the same as today, a continuation? For staff, the idea of "there's always a tomorrow" is also very important, because I remember when I was working in the prison service, I had many, many stressful days, and I needed to take a deep breath and to try to just remember that the day is going to end. And I had many stressful weeks where we had emergency situations across the prison service. Ran riots, we had uprisings, we had all kinds of things. And in those situations, you definitely need to remember that there's always a tomorrow. You just always have to take things in proportion. I believe that very strongly. Looking at things in the spectrum of things, a lot of prison guards, correction officers are waiting for their retirement. That's a huge thing. It's a huge subject of conversation. They often say to each other, "How long do you have left?" Meaning, when is your retirement? So there's always a tomorrow. That's a big. I really believe in that philosophy. I remember that I needed to last at least 13 years before I could get a retirement. That was the magic number for me. I mean, legally and economically, that's what I needed to reach. I was burnt out in the end. I just couldn't keep doing it. I was just like, I just can't keep doing this anymore. But I needed to bite my lip and survive. Eventually, I was released according to my own request. And there was a tomorrow. The tomorrow was I continued writing all of my books and speaking, and a lot of great things happened after I retired. So that was this concept of this idea of thinking in terms of there's always a tomorrow. I think it's a huge thing in life. So nowadays, now that I'm released from prison, I've been released for over a decade. Yep. You also go through hard times. You also go through a lot of pressures, economic pressures, and life throws its stuff at you. And I think that it's a huge lesson that I learned in the prison, that whatever hits me and my wife and my family, you need to always remember there's always a tomorrow. There's going to be a tomorrow with your children. There's going to be a tomorrow with any hardships that you might face. Yep, that's one of the things that I really learned in the prison service, that there's always a tomorrow. And whatever happens, whatever you're facing, whatever hits you, just take a deep breath, relax, take another deep breath, close your eyes, relax, take a cup of coffee, take a deep breath, relax, and then repeat all of the above Hold your buzz and then repeat after me. There's always a tomorrow, and the tomorrow can be brighter. Okay, that's the episode for today, and I hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch up with you again in the near future with another episode. And for now, just remember, there's always a tomorrow.